An HOA thought they could use his property for free, installing their equipment on his roof without his permission. They bullied him, ignored him, and thought they had won. But you won't believe the brilliant, technical trap he set for them. They thought they were stealing his Wi-Fi signal. He ended up owning it. Don't miss what happens when they get the bill. The first volley in what would become the silent. Bitter war for 123 Maple Drive wasn't fired from a weapon, but delivered with the frictionless ease of the digital age. It was an email, nested innocuously on a Tuesday morning between a 20-off coupon for a steakhouse Alex Sterling had never been to and a security alert from his bank. The subject line was a masterpiece of bland corporate optimism. Community Enhancement Project Phase 1 launch. Alex, a man whose entire professional life revolved around deciphering intent from lines of code, should have seen the hidden payload. At 38, he was a senior software architect for a major cybersecurity firm, a veteran of the code wars in Silicon Valley. He had spent 15 years building impenetrable digital fortresses for others, a life lived in the glow of multiple monitors, fueled by caffeine and the relentless pursuit of logical perfection. 6 months ago, he had cashed out a small fortune in stock options and fled. He'd traded the chaotic, hyper-connected existence of a Bay Area condo for this sprawling 2-story house in Sundance Peak, a planned community in a quiet corner of America. He had bought it for the silence, for the illusion of control, and for the promise of a sovereign territory where the only network he had to manage was his own. The Homeowners Association had been presented as a feature, not a bug, a simple background process. They'd said, running quietly to ensure the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. The lawns would remain emerald green, the fences a uniform shade of white, the houses free of peeling paint. The HOA, personified by a name on a letterhead, Brenda Donaldson. President was the guardian of this enforced tranquility. Alex had signed the covenant, a document the thickness of a phone book from a bygone era, with the weary acceptance of a man clicking, "I agree" on a term of service he hadn't fully read. It was the price of admission. He opened the email from Brenda. It was crafted with the sort of weaponized cheerfulness that only committees can produce. It spoke of leveraging synergistic assets, fostering hyperconnectivity, and building a forward-thinking digital canopy for the residents, stripped of its buzzword armor. The message announced that the Sundance Peak HOA was launching its own community-wide Wi-Fi network. It was. The email emphasized with italics, a complimentary service designed to enhance property values and foster a more connected community. A cynical smile touched Alex's lips. Complimentary was code for baked into your quarterly dues. Community Wi-Fi was code for slow, insecure, and spied on. He already had a dedicated fiber optic line piped directly into his home office, a pristine 1 gigabit per second symmetric connection to the global network. It was the digital equivalent of a private aqueduct, pure and unpolluted. He didn't need to drink from the communal well. He dragged the email to his archive folder and forgot about it. He had a complex encryption key to debug, a task requiring monastic focus. The first sign of trouble appeared 3 days later. It wasn't a subtle glitch, it was a catastrophic failure at the worst possible moment. Alex was on a live video call with a dozen stakeholders, including the CTO of a client whose multi-million-dollar contract was his direct responsibility. He was screen sharing, walking them through a critical security patch he had just developed. Halfway through a sentence, his own video feed froze into a pixelated mask of his face. The shared screen went black. A robotic, garbled version of his voice echoed in his headphones before being replaced by an infuriating silence. By the time his connection re-established 30 seconds later, the momentum was lost. The flow of his presentation shattered. He looked like an amateur, a charlatan whose own tech had failed him. The embarrassment was a hot flush on his neck. That evening, the problem metastasized, uploading a 750 megabyte file to his company's secure server. A task that should have been as quick as a deep breath, now timed out repeatedly. His smart home device's lights, thermostat, security cameras began dropping off the network and then reappearing. their status icons blinking in a maddening, asynchronous rhythm. His digital sanctuary was becoming a haunted house. The professional in him took over. The homeowner was angry, but the architect was intrigued. This was a system failure, and he built systems. He began with the basics, a methodical process of elimination that was second nature to him. He rebooted the commercial-grade modem in the state-of-the-art mesh Wi-Fi system that blanketed his home in a flawless web of connectivity. He ran deep diagnostics on his work laptop and his personal desktop. He checked every Cat6 cable, ensuring each was seated perfectly. Everything on his end was, to use his own professional jargon, nominal. His call to the internet service provider was exactly the exercise in futility he expected. A friendly but clueless agent read from a script, asked him to turn his modem off and on again, and then finally escalated him to a Tier 2 technician. The tech ran a remote line test. "Mr. Sterling, our diagnostics show a perfect, uninterrupted signal entering your premises," the voice said, tinny with digital compression. "We're clocking you at 1.2 gigabits, rock solid." "If there's a problem, sir, it's inside your house." The gauntlet had been thrown down. The problem was in his house, his fortress, his perfectly architected system. For 2 days, Alex became a ghost in his own home. His phone held aloft like a divining rod. He used a Wi-Fi analyzer map, a professional tool that turned the invisible world of radio frequencies into a visible spectrum of data. The air in his house, once digitally clean, was now choked with noise. The app showed a powerful, invasive signal broadcasting on both the 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz bands, stomping all over his own channels with the digital equivalent of muddy boots. The signal's service set identifier, its public name, was a monument to passive aggression Sundance Peak HOA community. The archived email from Brenda Donaldson came rushing back, no longer cheerful but sinister. Community enhancement. But how could it be so strong consumer-grade routers in his neighbors' homes wouldn't cause this level of interference? The signal was so dominant, it had to be originating from a point of extreme proximity. He walked the perimeter of his house, watching the signal strength on his phone's analyzer jump. It was weak at the front curb, stronger by the living room window, and stronger still as he rounded the corner into his backyard. He stood on his perfectly manicured lawn, the one the HOA covenants dictated must be mowed to a height of no more than 3 inches, and stared at his own house. The signal was peaking. It was coming from his house. Looking up, his eyes traced the line of the roof, and a cold dread, sharp and acidic, washed over him. He placed it against the rear wall, the rubber feet sinking slightly into the soft turf. As he climbed, each rung was a step deeper into a violation he couldn't yet comprehend. The quiet suburban street, the chirping birds, the distant hum of a lawnmower, it all felt like a stage set for a play in which he was the unwitting fool. His head cleared the edge of the roof, and there it was. Bolted with brutal permanence to the side of his own brick chimney was a white, weatherproof box. It was a commercial-grade Ubiquiti unified building-to-building bridge, a powerful piece of hardware designed to beam a network connection over long distances. It wasn't just a simple repeater. It was a high-performance data relay. Stamped on its side was the crisp blue logo of the Sundance Peak Homeowners Association. A thick, shielded Ethernet cable ran from the base of the unit, snaked under the lip of a row of shingles, and disappeared directly into a louvered attic vent. His attic. Alex clung to the ladder, a wave of vertigo sweeping over him that had nothing to do with the height. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. Someone, an employee, a contractor, someone acting on behalf of Brenda Donaldson and the HOA had physically come onto his land. They had placed a ladder against his house, climbed onto his roof, drilled into his chimney, and wired their equipment into the very structure of his home. They had done it without a phone call, without a notice, without his consent. They had treated his private property as a public utility pole, back on the ground. His hands were trembling, not with fear, but with a cold clear rage. This wasn't about Wi-Fi anymore. This was about sovereignty. He stormed into his office and pulled out the thick, white binder labeled Sundance Peak Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. He tore through the pages, past the minutiae of acceptable mailbox colors and holiday decoration timelines. He was a coder searching for the bug, the exploit they had used to justify this. He found it buried deep within the legalese of Article 4, Section 4.3 under the heading Maintenance of Common Elements and Limited Common Elements for Community Betterment. It was a paragraph of dense, convoluted language that was clearly the work of a cunning lawyer. It granted the HOA board the right to access, maintain, repair, and enhance any limited common elements for projects deemed to be for the betterment of the community as a whole. He flipped back to the definition section. Limited common elements included, among other things, the exterior surface of main walls and the exterior surface of roofs and chimneys. It was an exploit of genius-level villainy. They had taken a clause intended to allow the HOA to fix a crumbling chimney or a leaky roof for the sake of the neighborhood's appearance and twisted it into a legal crowbar. They had pried open a loophole, giving them the right to mount their hardware on his house, all under the guise of community betterment. Alex slammed the binder shut. The rage was now crystallizing into something else purpose. They had used their rules, their labyrinthine document of 1,000 petty tyrannies. To justify their actions, they believed they were untouchable, wrapped in the legal armor they had written for themselves. They had invaded his world of logic and order with their bureaucratic chaos. Brenda Donaldson and her board had made a critical miscalculation. They had trespassed on the property of a quiet homeowner, but they had declared war on a systems architect. And Alex Sterling was about to design a system of retaliation they would never see coming. The inferno of Alex's rage did not result in a wildfire, but was instead channeled into the cold, clean burn of a plasma torch. He was an architect, and architects do not lash out. They analyze, they design, and they build. Back in his office, with the thick HOA binder lying on his desk like a captured enemy standard, he did not punch a wall or fire off a furious, typo-laden email. Instead, he created a new folder on his secure, encrypted hard drive. He named it Project Chimera. Inside, he created the first document, Evidence Log B1TXT, with the precision of a crime scene investigator. He documented everything. Item 00 timestamp photographs of the Ubiquity device bolted to his chimney, taken from multiple angles on the ground and from the ladder. Item 002 screenshots of the Wi-Fi analyzer app, showing the overwhelming signal strength of Sundance Peak HOA community and its direct interference with his own network channels. Item 003, a PDF of the original email from Brenda Donaldson, with the phrases community enhancement and complementary service highlighted in yellow. Item 004, a scanned copy of Article 4, Section 4.3 of the HOA Covenant Month, the legal exploit they had used against him. His next step was to follow protocol. A premature, emotional outburst would be dismissed as hysterics. He needed to build a case file that demonstrated he had acted reasonably, that he had exhausted all official channels before being forced to escalate. He composed an email to the official HOA board address, CCing the generic address for Brenda Donaldson. The email was a model of detached professionalism. Subject formal inquiry and request for removal of unauthorized equipment at 123 Maple Drive. Dear Sundance Peak HOA board members, it has come to my attention that a piece of network hardware, specifically what appears to be a commercial-grade Wi-Fi relay, has been installed on the chimney of my private residence at 123 Maple Drive. I have attached photographs for your reference. See attachments A and B. This installation was performed without my knowledge or explicit consent. While I have reviewed Article 4, Section 4, 3 of the Community Covenant regarding limited common elements, I contend that this clause does not grant the HOA the right to install powered, data transmitting equipment on a homeowner's private property for a non-essential service. The device is causing significant radio frequency interference, which is negatively impacting my home network and my ability to perform my professional duties from home. See Attachment C for signal analysis. I formally request the immediate removal of this equipment. Please provide me with a timeline for its removal within the next 48 hours. Sincerely, Alex Sterling, 123 Maple Drive. He hit send and felt a sliver of satisfaction. The ball was in their court. The digital paper trail had begun. He received a response not in 48 hours, but in less than 2. It wasn't an email, it was a phone call. His phone buzzed on, displaying a number he didn't recognize. He answered, putting it on speaker. Alex Sterling, he said, his voice neutral. Mr. Sterling, this is Brenda Donaldson with the HOA. The voice was exactly as he'd imagined from her emails, bright, brittle, and radiating an unshakable self-assurance. It was the voice of a woman who had never lost an argument at a PTA meeting. I received your rather pointed email. Brenda, I was hoping for a written response, but thank you for calling, Alex said, already typing notes into his log file. Call received from Beatball Donaldson, 11:42 a.m. Well, I find a personal touch is often better for clearing up these little misunderstandings, she said. The condescension was palpable. I think you've misunderstood the covenant you agreed to when you bought your lovely home. Section 4.3 is quite clear. The roof and chimney are limited common elements. We are well within our rights to utilize them for projects that benefit the entire community. I don't believe utilize is synonymous with permanently affixed powered electronics too, Alex countered, keeping his tone even. And this benefit is actively harming my ability to work. A sigh, heavy and theatrical, came through the speaker. Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, your personal internet preferences do not supersede the betterment of the entire neighborhood. Dozens of your neighbors are already enjoying the complimentary Wi-Fi. We've received nothing but positive feedback. You are, so far, the only complaint. The classic playground tactic: isolate the target, make them feel like the outlier, the troublemaker. My complaint isn't about the service. It's about the unauthorized installation of hardware on my house, Alex clarified. Are you refusing to remove it? There's nothing to refuse, Brenda said, her voice hardening. The installation is perfectly legal and compliant with the bylaws. The equipment will remain. It's a key hub for the entire west side of the neighborhood. Now, if you're having technical issues, perhaps you should consider switching to the community Wi-Fi. It's quite reliable. The audacity left him speechless for a second. She was offering his own trespassing as a solution to the problem it created. So, to be clear for my records, Alex said slowly, his fingers flying across the keyboard, the HOA's official position is that the equipment will not be removed. That is correct. Is there anything else? The tone was dismissive, final. A sudden, chilling thought struck him. A question so obvious he was furious he hadn't considered it sooner. Just one more thing. Brenda, that device, the Ubiquity Bridge, it requires electrical power to operate. How exactly is it being powered? There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. For the first time, the unshakable confidence in Brenda's voice seemed to flicker. The installation was handled by certified professionals. Mr. Sterling, they handled all the technical aspects. That's not what I asked, Alex pressed, a cold knot tightening in his gut. I asked where the power is coming from. There is no HOA-owned power outlet on my roof. As I said, it was handled, she snapped, her cheerful facade cracking completely. Frankly, your aggressive tone is very unneighborly. The equipment stays. Have a wonderful day. The line went dead. Alex stared at the phone. She didn't answer the question. He looked up at the ceiling, his gaze fixed on the spot directly below the chimney, his attic. The air in the attic was thick and hot, smelling of ancient dust and baked wood. A single bare bulb cast long, distorted shadows across the landscape of pink insulation and forgotten cardboard boxes. Alex stepped carefully from one wooden joist to the next, making his way toward the chimney at the far end of the house. He saw the cable immediately. It was the same thick, black Ethernet cable he had seen on the roof. It snaked down from the louvered vent, ran neatly along a roof truss, held in place by pristine white plastic clips, and then dropped down toward the attic floor. The workmanship was professional, clean, maliciously clean. His eyes followed the cable. It didn't plug into some complex junction box. It didn't splice into the house's main wiring. It ended in a small, black box, a power over Ethernet PoE injector, a single device that both sends data and electrical power over one Ethernet cable, and that PoE injector was plugged directly into an electrical outlet, an outlet he had installed himself 2 months prior, when he'd first moved in. He had plans to turn part of the attic into a climate-controlled storage space for his old computer hardware. He'd had an electrician run a new, dedicated circuit up there, installing a single, 4-socket outlet box on a central support beam. It was his outlet, his circuit, his electricity. They hadn't just trespassed on his roof. They hadn't just interfered with his internet. They were stealing his power. He stood there in the stifling heat of the attic, the hum of the PoE injector barely audible, and he began to laugh. It was a quiet, joyless laugh at first, a sound of pure disbelief. Then it grew, echoing in the dusty space. It was the laugh of a man who had just been handed the keys to his enemy's kingdom. Brenda Donaldson and the HOA had been so arrogant, so wrapped up in their own perceived authority. They had made a fatal blunder. They had twisted their own rules to claim his roof, but there was nothing in their 1,000-page covenant that gave them the right to his electricity. They had created a physical, and now electrical, dependency on his property. They had plugged their community project directly into his private grid. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of the PoE injector plugged into his outlet. Evidence log VA1 was about to get a critical update. Item 05, photographic evidence of HOA equipment. PoE injector plugged into my private electrical circuit without authorization, constituting theft of utilities. As he descended the attic ladder, the dust motes dancing in the light from the hallway, the full scope of his counterattack began to form in his mind. It was beautiful in its simplicity and its logic. They wanted to use his property as part of their network. Fine. They wanted to use his power, fine. But property and power are services, and services have a price. His initial plan to simply force a removal was now laughably inadequate. That was a defensive move. It was time to go on the offensive. He wasn't going to fight them over the covenant. That was their territory, a field littered with legal landmines. He would create a new battlefield, one where he was the master, a battlefield of contracts, invoices, and network protocols. He walked back into his office, the anger gone, replaced by the exhilarating focus of a coder on the verge of a breakthrough. He sat down and created a new file in the Project Chimera folder. He named it Counteroffensive Strategy Doc. He started typing. Phase 1, isolate and control. The HOA believes they are using my chimney. In reality, they are a peripheral on my system. First steps sever their connection to the wider internet, but not to my internal network. Phase 2, the new service provider. They need bandwidth. I have bandwidth. I will become their new, exclusive internet service provider, a hostile takeover of their own network. Phase 3, monetization. Create a legally sound service contract. Bill them for services rendered equipment hosting fee. Premium bandwidth provision. Electrical utility surcharge. Bill them for everything. He leaned back, a genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in days. Brenda wanted to build a connected community. Alex was going to make sure she paid the price for the connection. Starting with the sign, he needed a sign, something simple, direct, and just a little bit petty. He grabbed a piece of cardboard from the recycling bin and a thick black marker. He uncapped it, the chemical smell filling his office, and began to write. Alex Sterling did not sleep. He spent the hours between midnight and dawn not in restless agitation, but in a state of hyper-focused creation. The anger that had once been a blazing inferno had been forged and cooled into a weapon of intricate design. In the sterile, blue-tinted glow of his triple monitor setup, he was no longer a homeowner. He was a wartime architect designing a siege engine. When the first pale light of morning began to filter through his office window, his work was complete. His first move in this new phase of the war was not digital, but brutally analog. He walked out onto his front lawn, the grass still damp with morning dew. The air was cool and smelled of fresh-cut grass and the distant promise of rain. In this suburban paradise, every blade of grass seemed to stand at attention, compliant with HOA regulations. Alex held a large, jagged piece of cardboard and a thick black marker. He drove the cardboard into the center of the lawn, a defiant stake through the heart of the neighborhood's enforced conformity. With deliberate, angry strokes, he wrote a message for all to see. A primal scream rendered in misspelled ink. This signaled free. It was ugly. It was crude. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive warfare, a declaration that the silent treaty of Sundance Peak had been broken. Satisfied with his public statement, he returned to his sanctuary. The command center of his one-man army. Here, the real work had been done. Overnight, he had fundamentally re-engineered the flow of data in his home. He had accessed the core administrative panel of his enterprise-grade firewall, a piece of hardware far more powerful than anything a typical home would possess. With a few dozen lines of code and a series of precise clicks, he performed an act of digital amputation. He located the unique hardware identifier, the MAC address of the HOA's rooftop repeater. It was now flagged, a digital pariah. He then constructed a prison. In networking terms, it was a virtual local area network, or VLAN, but in Alex's mind, it was a dungeon. He named it VLAN 66 HOA Quarantine. Any data packet originating from the HOA device was now automatically and irrevocably shunted into this isolated subnet. It was a digital dead end, completely walled off from his personal computers, his work servers, his security cameras, and every other device that constituted his digital life. The trespasser on his roof was now a prisoner in his network. But imprisonment was not enough. He needed leverage. The final piece of his trap is a captive portal. He coded a simple but unyielding web page. When the HOA repeater, now starved of its connection to the wider internet, tried to phone home, it would be directed to this single page. It was the only place in the digital universe it was allowed to go. The design of the page was deliberately sterile and intimidating, mimicking the soulless legal documents the HOA so loved to use. At the top, a severe heading read, "Welcome to the 123 Maple Drive Independent Network Access Point." Below it, a block of text laid out the new reality. By attempting to access this network, you, the user, acting on behalf of the Sundance Peak Homeowners Association, acknowledge that you are utilizing privately owned infrastructure, including but not limited to physical hosting space, electrical power, and network bandwidth. Continued use of these private resources is subject to the following terms of service and fee schedule. Your connection will not be completed until you agree to these terms. The fee schedule was his Mona Lisa of malice. Each item was designed not just to charge, but to educate and to punish. Equipment, hosting, and maintenance fee. Tier 1 chimney, mount $25 per day, billed daily. Electrical utility, surcharge standard POE, draw $5 per day, billed daily. Bandwidth provision basic package, up to 5 Mbps, 10 GB, data cap $50 per day, billed daily. Unauthorized access fine retroactive to date of installation, a one-time charge of $500. At the very bottom of the page, beneath the crushing weight of these new expenses, was a single, lonely button. I agree to these terms. There was no other option. There was no escape. To restore their precious community Wi-Fi, they would have to sign his confession. He leaned back in his chair. The siege engine was built and aimed. The trap was set. All he had to do now was wait. The fallout began subtly around 9:30 a.m. on the official Sundance Peak Community Facebook group. A woman named Carol Gable posted a confused message. Is anyone else having trouble with the community Wi-Fi this morning? I cannot seem to load my emails. A few minutes later, another comment. Yes, ours is out too. The kids are going crazy. By 11 a.m., the trickle had become a flood. More than 24 homeowners, all on the west side of the development, all within range of Alex's house, were reporting a total outage. The forum, usually a sedate place for discussing lawn care and complaining about dog walkers, descended into digital panic. This is ridiculous. We pay our dues for these services. Someone call Brenda. She needs to get this fixed. Is it a storm? Did lightning hit something? Alex monitored the digital chaos with a cold sense of detachment. He was a force of nature they could not comprehend. They were looking for a storm, never suspecting the problem was a single man in a quiet house, calmly sipping his morning coffee. The first direct consequence of his actions arrived at 1:15 p.m. A white van with the logo Protect Solutions pulled up. Not in his driveway, but a few houses down. A man in a blue uniform got out and sat in his driver's seat for a long time, staring at a ruggedized laptop. Alex watched him from his office window. He could see the frustration on the man's face, even from a distance. The technician was seeing the digital wall Alex had built. He was seeing a network node that was powered on, active but resolutely refusing to connect to the internet. After nearly 30 minutes of fruitless, remote diagnostics, the van drove the remaining 100 yards and parked at Alex's curb. The technician, a young man with a weary expression, walked up the driveway. He glanced at the bizarre, misspelled sign on the lawn, his brow furrowed in confusion, and then he rang the doorbell. Alex opened it immediately, a picture of calm. I can help you, Alex stated more than asked. Yeah, I hope so, the tech said, gesturing with his thumb back toward the street. I am with ProTech. We manage the HOA's network. We have got a major node, Darian. The main repeater for this whole section seems to be online, but it is not passing any traffic to the web. It is like it is trapped. All the data just stops here. At this house? That is an accurate assessment, Alex said, allowing a thin smile. The device is on my property, plugged into my power, and attempting to use my private internet connection. I have secured my network. You are seeing the result of that security. The technician's eyes widened. The pieces clicked into place. This was not a hardware failure. Oh, you are the homeowner. HOA dispatch said there was a dispute. A dispute is one word for it. Alex said, theft and trespassing are others. You can tell your client, the Sundance Peak HOA, that their access to my infrastructure is no longer free. The new terms of service are displayed on a captive portal page. If someone with authorization clicks agree, the service will be magically restored. Otherwise, there is nothing for you to fix. He closed the door gently, leaving the technician standing alone on the porch, a messenger with very bad news to deliver. The message was sent. The countdown had begun. The explosion came precisely at 4:32 p.m. A cherry-red SUV, driven with a fury that was evident even in its engine noise, screeched to a halt at his curb. Brenda Donaldson launched herself from the driver's seat. She was a whirlwind of righteous indignation. Dressed in a coral blazer and sharp black slacks, her HOA name tag gleaming like a sheriff's badge. Her face was flushed a deep, unhealthy red. She marched up the lawn, her heels sinking into the turf like daggers, and stopped to glare at the cardboard sign as if it had personally insulted her ancestors. She then stormed to the front door and began hammering on it with her fist. Alex took a slow, calming breath. He picked up his primary laptop, the one displaying his beautiful, orderly firewall logs, and walked to the door. He opened it and stood in the doorway, a calm island in her hurricane of rage. What is the meaning of this? She snarled. It was not a question. It was a demand for capitulation. Her finger, trembling with rage, was aimed at the sign. Good afternoon to you too, Brenda, Alex replied, his voice placid. I assume you received my invoice. Is this about setting up a payment plan? You have committed sabotage, she accused. her voice rising in pitch and volume. "You have destroyed a community asset. My phone has not stopped ringing all day. You are single-handedly depriving your neighbors of a service they pay for." "Let us be very clear about the facts," Alex said, his tone that of a patient teacher explaining a simple concept to a difficult child. He held up his laptop, angling the screen so she could see it. "I have not sabotaged anything. Your equipment, which was placed on my property without my consent, is an unauthorized device on my private network. For my own security, I have isolated it. You can see it right here." He pointed to the quarantine log. "The service outage is a direct result of the HOA's refusal to agree to the terms for using my infrastructure. The power to restore service is, and has been all day, entirely in your hands. Click the button. Brenda, agree to pay for what you are using." Her eyes flicked from the incomprehensible data on the screen to his calm face. The logic was so simple, so infuriatingly sound, that she could not find a flaw in it. "This is blackmail. You cannot just invent fees." "Can I not?" Alex asked softly. "You invented a right to drill holes in my chimney based on a twisted interpretation of a clause about maintaining appearances. You felt entitled to my electricity without even the courtesy of a notification. It seems we are both quite inventive. The difference is, my terms are based on tangible things: property rental, power consumption, data transfer. Your power is based on a 3-ring binder and bullying. You started this game of reinterpreting the rules. Brenda, I am simply playing it better. We will fine you. We will put a lien on your house," she threatened, falling back on her usual weapons. "You are in violation of a dozen covenants." "Please do it," Alex said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its pleasant veneer and taking on a hard, sharp edge. "Please file the paperwork, because the moment you do, my lawyer will file a counterclaim. And his first move will be to start the discovery process for the criminal complaint we will be filing against the HOA for theft of utilities. Your civil suit for a fine will look rather silly when you, as president of the board, are being deposed under oath about authorizing the tapping of a private citizen's electrical grid. That is not a covenant violation. Brenda, that is a crime." The word hung in the air between them. Crime. It was the kill shot. The fury on Brenda's face did not just fade, it collapsed. The red flush drained away, leaving her skin pale and blotchy. Her entire posture changed. The shoulders of her power blazer seemed to slump. The foundation of her world was the absolute authority of the HOA bylaws. He had just reminded her that the laws of the state and the country existed outside her binder, and they were infinitely more powerful. She had been the queen of a small, petty kingdom, and he had just pointed out that her castle was built on a swamp. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open, the angry words she had prepared now useless dust in her throat. The fear in her eyes was primal. It was the fear of consequences, a concept she had clearly not had to consider for a very long time. "That sign," she finally whispered, her voice weak, all the fight gone from it. "Take down that sign. It is a violation. Section 7.8 of the bylaws. No unapproved signage on lawns." Alex actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, genuine sound of victory. "Of course, Brenda, I am a law-abiding member of this community." He stepped past her, plucked the cardboard sign from the grass, walked back to his porch, and leaned it against the wall of his house. Directly next to the front door, it was still perfectly visible, perhaps even more so. "There, no longer on the lawn. Are we done?" The silence that followed Brenda Donaldson's hasty retreat was more profound than the quiet Alex had originally sought in Sundance Peak. It was a silence filled with tension, the digital equivalent of a battlefield after the cannons have ceased firing, but before the victor has been declared. His sign remained propped by his door, a silent sentinel. His captive portal remained active, a digital toll booth on a road no one was traveling. On the community Facebook group, the initial panic had morphed into a sullen, Simmering resentment aimed squarely at the HOA board. The free service was gone, and the leadership was nowhere to be found. The HOA's next move came not with a phone call or an email, but with the quiet rumble of the Protect Solutions van rolling down the street just after 9 o'clock the following morning. It parked at the curb. This time, two technicians emerged. They weren't carrying laptops, they were carrying an extension ladder. Their objective was clear. They weren't trying to fix the network anymore. They were going to remove the evidence. They thought that by taking their ball and going home, the game would be over. Alex was waiting for them, and as the two men began to unlatch the ladder from their van's roof rack, he stepped out of his front door. He was holding a freshly printed document in one hand and a small, new sign in the other. He walked calmly down his driveway. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said, his voice polite but firm. The lead technician, the same one from the previous visit, sighed wearily. "Look, mister, we've just been told to get the equipment off your roof. We'll be in and out in 20 minutes. We just want this to be over." "I understand completely," Alex said, "and I'm happy to grant you access to my property to complete your work. However, accessing my property is a service." He staked the new sign into the lawn, right next to the hole from the first one. This one was printed in neat, professional letters. "Private property access for contractors by appointment only. Liability waiver and service fee required." He then held out the printed document to the technician. "This is the property access agreement for equipment removal. It indemnifies me from any damage or injury you might cause or sustain. It also outlines the service fee for using my property as a work site. It's a one-time charge of $250. You can pay via the QR code at the bottom. Or your client can, as soon as the payment is confirmed, you may begin." The technician stared at the paper, then at Alex, his expression a perfect blend of disbelief and despair. "You want to charge us to take our own stuff back?" "To be precise," Alex corrected, "I'm charging for access to my private property. The purpose of that access is your business. My policy is consistent. Use of my property, my power, or my access incurs a fee. Please, feel free to call your client and have them authorize the payment. Until then, you are legally trespassing if you set 1 foot on my lawn." The technician snatched the paper and stalked back to the van. Pulling out his phone, Alex could hear the muffled, angry conversation from his driveway. The words, "He's charging us again," and "unbelievable," drifted through the quiet morning air. After 10 minutes, the technicians, looking utterly defeated, began strapping the ladder back onto the van. They had been denied. They drove away, leaving Alex alone on his driveway, the victor of a battle they hadn't even known they were going to fight. This final move checkmated the HOA completely. They couldn't leave the equipment there, as it was a useless, power-stealing monument to their failure. But they could not remove it without paying Alex's fee. They were trapped, not by a digital firewall, but by a simple, undeniable logic backed by property law. The surrender came 4 hours later. It was not Brenda's cherry red SUV that appeared, but a modest gray sedan. A different woman emerged, older and with a deeply weary look on her face. She introduced herself as Maria, the HOA treasurer. "Brenda," she explained, "was unwell." Maria stood on the public sidewalk, refusing to step onto Alex's property as if it were cursed land. "She was here," she said, "to resolve the situation." "There's nothing to resolve, Yo," Alex said from his porch. "There's an invoice to be paid. Actually, 2 invoices now. One for the retroactive hosting and utility theft, and one for today's dispatch contractor access fee. The total is $1,480. Once it's paid, the equipment can be removed." Maria flinched at the amount but simply nodded. "We know, we'll pay it, but we need this to be over. We need a guarantee that this is the end of it." "I was hoping you'd say that," Alex said. He went back inside and returned with a new folder. "This is a final settlement agreement, drafted by my lawyer. It's quite simple. The HOA agrees to pay the full invoice amount. The HOA agrees to never again install any equipment of any kind on my property. The HOA agrees that its agents or contractors will not set foot on my property without my written permission. Finally, the HOA and all its board members agree to a non-disclosure and non-disparagement clause. You will not discuss the details of this incident with other residents or publicly. You will simply state that the technical issues have been resolved by decommissioning the West Side node. In return, I will not pursue criminal charges for the theft of utilities or a civil suit for damages. He handed her the folder. She read through it, her expression grim. It was total, unconditional surrender. "There's one more thing," Alex said, his voice flat and cold. "There's a line item at the end, a $500 legal consultation and administrative burden fee. That's for my time and my trouble." Maria looked up, her eyes pleading. "Isn't that a bit much?" "Is it?" Alex countered. "You folks drilled holes in my chimney. You treated my home like a public utility closet. You cost me 2 days of work dealing with the network failures and 2 more days of dealing with your board's incompetence. $500 is a bargain. Sign the agreement and pay the invoice, and this all goes away. Refuse, and my next call is to the district attorney's office. The choice is yours." An hour later, Alex received an email notification. The Sundance Peak HOA had made a digital payment of $1,980. A few minutes after that, Maria returned, handed him the signed and notarized settlement agreement, and left without a word. That evening, Alex stood in his office. His internet connection was pristine, faster and more stable than ever. He dragged the entire Project Chimera folder into the recycling bin and then clicked Empty Recycling Bin. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items?" He clicked yes. The war was over. He had defended his castle not with walls and weapons, but with firewalls and logic. He had beaten the HOA at their own game by refusing to play it, writing his own rules on his own terms. The silence in his house was no longer tense. It was the sound of absolute sovereignty. It was the sound of peace. And that's how one man turned an HOA's arrogance against them, using contract law and a bit of tech savvy to win the war for his own roof. A perfect story of clever revenge, where the bully gets exactly what they deserve. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story of justice, be sure to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you would have done